And to discuss this, we're joined from Ottawa by Ferry de Kerckhove. He's a former Canadian ambassador to Egypt and has decades of experience in defence and foreign policy. In Waterloo, near Toronto, Bessma Momani. She is a professor of political science at the University of Waterloo and a senior fellow at the Centre for International Governance Innovation. In London for us is Hisham Alghannam. He is an associate fellow at the King Faisal Centre for Research and Islamic Studies. Thank you to all three of you. I have to start with you, Hisham. Is this not a total overreaction to a tweet that didn't actually demand anything, just made a suggestion?
I don't think it's just a tweet. The problem started with this current Liberal government in Canada. I do think it's much deeper than a tweet. The dispute is. For sure, definitely the tweet had I mean, it ended the Saudi tolerance towards the current Canadian government, but it wasn't only about tweet. It's about not using the proper means to conduct foreign policy and to speak with a country that you should have a mutual, and you're currently having a mutual. Beneficial relationship with. This is what upset the Saudis. They saw this as an insult, and they saw this as a PR to deflect internal and domestic criticism towards the current government in Canada because of the light armored vehicles deal that would probably be scrapped now and cancelled if things that continue to be escalated.
Ferry, what do you make of the reaction from Riyadh? I mean, these are a raft of measures which would usually be imposed when something, you would think, far more serious happens in bilateral relations.
Well, I have to say that I find the reaction of the Saudi rather appalling. I do not deny the fact that Mrs. Freeland's tweet was certainly an intrusion, but very legitimate in the name of human rights. But it was a request, some speed up in the process, and the sooner the liberation of Mr. Badawi, the better. We've been at it for quite a while. The fact that started that was, of course, the decision to have even the sister of Mr. Badawi arrested. And so the reaction of Canada as a defender of human rights and democracy did that tweet. A lot of people have been bemoaning the tweet. In fact, whether it would have been a tweet or an answer to a journalist or whatever, that is not the issue. The issue is the human rights treatment of people in Saudi Arabia. But of course, the reaction of the Saudi had to be expected. The Crown Prince doesn't broach any criticism. He wants to do things on his own, on his rhythm, and without being harassed by outsiders. And of course, choosing Canada as opposed to a country with whom Saudi Arabia has extensive relation is an easy way, because after all, you've got a trading relationship of about $4 billion. And so, yes, the reaction is really exaggerated compared to the nature of the tweet itself. Kicking out an ambassador in 24 hours is very harsh. Kicking out 7,000 medical students from Canada and sending then the poor kids, sending all over the world to renew their studies elsewhere, disrupting families. Of course, it's very harsh. All of these measures are exaggerated, but they don't surprise me given the nature of the sensitivity of the Crown Prince from any criticism from abroad.
Bessma, you've been nodding your head throughout Ferry's answer there. Over to you.
Look, the reality is I think there is only one real attempt of deflection here, and that's what's happening in Saudi Arabia. To your first guest, Hisham, look, the reality is the LAV deal has been said and done, critiqued, and frankly, all of the hoopla over that was over about a year ago. So there's no real attempt to deflect here in terms of the LAV deal. That said, what is being deflected is the criticism of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of his approach to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And I think that's where the deflection attempt is. You know, the past week, Arab media, including internal, I think very quiet, but internal discussion inside the kingdom has been that, frankly, this deal is not favorable, particularly to the Palestinians, and that Jared Kushner's very close relationship with Mohammed bin Salman has maybe perhaps compromised Mohammed bin Salman's loyalty to the Palestinian cause. cause. That has been reverberating inside the Arab media for several weeks. And it's not a coincidence that his father, the King Salman, basically reined in his son and told him enough is enough, and put out a very bold statement that frankly is a rebuke of his son, that basically we stand firm with the Palestinians' long desires. And so I think this is the real deflection. It's not about Canada. It's never been about Canada. It's about Saudi Arabia. And as Ferry said, because our bilateral economic relationship is relatively so low, it's frankly easy to sacrifice Canada. They're not going to do this with the UK. They're not going to do this with the United States. And you can find plenty of statements. The United States report of human rights, and just released in June of this year, is a long laundry list of accusations against the Saudis for their human rights violations. So there's nothing new in terms of what Canada said. But we are a sacrificial lamb because it's sent out the message to the world that Mohammed bin Salman does not take criticism, and if you do, lucrative contracts and business deals will be cut. And hence we see the international community today, starting with the UK and even the United States, which frankly has upset many, many Canadians, absolutely silent. They are deafeningly silent on the issue of supporting Canada in this. And so Mohammed bin Salman did win. He won in terms of signaling to the world that you criticize Saudi Arabia, you will be punished.
So many issues there, Hisham, for you to pick up on, because these accusations about what's going on in Saudi Arabia are not new. Human Rights Watch has said for the past few months there's an unrelenting crackdown on the women's rights movement. King Salman, as Bessma has mentioned, has said in public that Saudi Arabia does not support the American position of recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. MBS, the Crown Prince, particularly silent about that. So is this deflection from Saudi Arabia rather than what you say, deflection in Canada?
I'm not going to refute the conspiracy theory part.
There's no conspiracy theories. They're just accusations that are going around.
Please. You did not interrupt. Let me speak, please. The official position, Saudi position towards the Palestinian-Israeli issue did not change in the last 2 years. So I'm not going into this. Refuting this conspiracy theories that Bessma just said. And the part that yes, many numerous other Western countries produce these human rights reports. And the Saudis know that they are used. They are used as the Saudis are a perfect target for the left and the West for domestic political gains. This is totally understandable by the Saudis. And the Saudis also understand there are two radically different value systems between Canada and Saudi, and the Canadians do not have to agree with the Saudis on that. The problem that remains is that there were other channels that the Canadians could have conducted their message, communicated what they wanted to do, other than Twitter and trying to insult the Saudis, like the way that it happened. I mean, this is the main issue. It's not about having criticism towards human rights. Many other countries in the West do that, and many other countries in the West are less important to Canada than the Saudis. They could have done it with them, but it's not about this. It's about insulting the Saudis and the way that it happened. It's about conducting foreign policy on social media. It's about the Canadian embassy in Riyadh ordering and commanding the Saudis to release someone that is under investigation now. I mean, this is not acceptable by any means.
Okay, listen, the word that was used in the tweet was urge. It was not demand. It was not a demand, it seems.
Immediately
the word was urge.
Release.
Ferry, the issue
here...
Yes,
I know, immediately release.
No, okay, but urge. Ferry, Hisham seems to be basically repeating the line that is coming out of Riyadh. So how much of a concern is it for the rest of the world?
No, I'm not repeating the line.
No, but no,
Riyadh is saying that. Riyadh is saying it's about the tweet. There is a context to that.
Absolutely, yes.
The narrative that you're producing is not correct. Well, the issues with this current Canadian government is long before the tweet. It's not only about the tweet.
No, absolutely. I totally understand that. That's not a problem. Okay. But we're talking about the reaction that has come after the tweet. Okay, we understand that you say that it's more about just what was in those characters on social media. But Ferry, the issue is here, how is this changing political and diplomatic dialogue if a country can say something as simple as Canada did and then produce this reaction? from a country like Saudi Arabia. Does it mean that now political dialogue is different, that people have to be more circumspect in what they say, that they shouldn't stand up for their rights because this kind of reaction could come and be directed towards any other country?
Well, I'll start by being very happy that the values between Canada and those of the Saudi are different, because I would hate to have the same values if it's that the kind of treatment that you're meting out to people who are trying to defend their own country and their own rights. But I would say that I tend to agree that the dialogue has changed, and this is why we in the West, instead of shutting up, we actually have to speak out and create a kind of an alliance of democracies and defenders of human rights, because it is true that it's not just in Saudi Arabia. We see our neighbor to the south, which is also becoming extraordinarily indifferent to certain human rights, and I won't go to the list. You have illiberal democracies in Eastern Europe. You've got a rise of populism. So I think that indeed democracy and human rights are in danger. All the more reason not to diminish the tone of the dialogue, the tone of the request, the tone of urging or demanding or whatever utterance that you would like to quote. My bottom line is that no, there's a constant need to do more and better in terms of defending human rights. Institutions like Amnesty International and others should be revered rather than condemned. I think it's a global issue, and yes, the dialogue has changed, but traditional diplomacy won't really work. We have to have both quiet diplomacy and also clearly express the fundamental values that motivate us. Otherwise, we're going to lose out our countries to an entirely different political and economic spectrum. I agree that the 2008 crisis, economic crisis in the West, have brought a lot of countries in Asia and elsewhere to question the value of the model that we have established starting in 1945 and onwards. And also that has also created a kind of a love affair with authoritarian, autocratic government, hence the need, quite to the contrary, to create an alliance of liberal, economically open, democratic, and human rights abiding countries to try and run counter, to buck the trend.
Ferry, I'd like to pick up on that point. And just finally, Bessma, to you, the alliance that Ferry is talking about that he would like to see, there's been complete silence, I believe, from the United States on this issue. There's been relative silence from the United Kingdom. It's basically issued a bland statement saying both sides should show restraint. Are you surprised at the lack of support for Canada in this particular dispute?
Well, it's unprecedented. Frankly, this is something that Canada is just not accustomed to. You know, we tend to play nice, but we are very supportive of the concept of multilateralism. NATO, obviously NAFTA, you know, all of these alliances is kind of the Canadian foreign policy modus operandi. We love to be a part of groups and like-minded groups, and we assume that like-minded groups, our NATO allies and others, would at least utter some words of support. And we've seen a deafening silence, which again points to the point that I raised earlier, which is that Mohammed bin Salman has won in sending out the chill to the international community not to criticize the Saudis. Now, of course, as Ferry pointed out, you know, Donald Trump is a loose cannon, and there is no love lost between Donald Trump and Justin Trudeau, our Prime Minister. You know, Donald Trump has mocked our Prime Minister on Twitter. He said very terrible things about him, and I think it points to the reality that there is a fascination among these illiberal democracies with strong men. There is, unfortunately, not an appreciation for the kind of progressive values that someone like Justin Trudeau espouses. And so we have two different role models in the world today.
Sure. Listen, we have to leave it there. I'm sorry, we have run out of time, but to all three
Can I say
of you,
something?
Thank you very much. I'm afraid, Hisham, we really haven't got time for it. We have run out, and we have to move on to the next item. But thank you for joining us on the Newsmakers, all three of you.